Do 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 do. Oh man! Welcome to Tuesday. I will get into this briefly in a moment. I'm gonna give the usual few minutes for people who are gonna show up to show up. I got the stream built super late, so notifications aren't out as early as usual. I blame my work for that. Oh, man. I actually might have more work when I'm done with this. Fun stuff, right? Oh, boy. Let's see. Do I have anything else that's kind of new that that matters before I dive in on topic? Because I think people are going to get here a little later because I just didn't have the stream built early because I'm just way behind on some stuff. Before I dive into the topic, like, I know that Joel Korososkin talked about it in his live stream today. Corey briefly talked about the Lacey Act. He said Legacy Act for a bit, but a little chuckle at that. But and, there's a bunch of videos out there. I think the best video out there so far is probably the one from Chung at the water box. So if Chung shows up, I'll give him a little love. And I'm also going to have a video this Saturday that's a short version of this, basically put, just because I really think this is super important. And not a lot of people necessarily go and rewatch live streams. I mean, Replay Crew, shout out to you guys. You're the best. But this is actually pretty important, especially for those of us in the United States, but, several countries, when the United States does something, or when certain other countries do things, it's vice versa, the other will follow, but most commonly, like, big measures that the United States tends to make often filter up toward Canada, and then Canada makes a similar measure. Sometimes it even filters over toward the UK, although there's significant difference in the government there. But these things happen where when it happens in one place, often it filters to some of the other major nations that are roughly similar, right? and that's being very broad. I'm not trying to paint some political anything on this. I want to be really clear there. So there's a measure. It's for those who might not know. I'm sure by now you probably know, but there's what's called the America Competes Act, and that's let's see here, House Resolution 4521. So that's the official number and all that kind of stuff, but within this very large, it's like 3,000 pages. I mean, it's monstrous, and I'm not going to get into all the other stuff because some of it's like, depending on how you want to view it, it's either bad or good, and there's some good stuff, there's some bad stuff, but within it there's a 5-page, maybe it's 6, section about amendments to the Lacey Act. The Lacey Act has been around for a while. I'm going to try to avoid diving too deep on any of this stuff, okay? I know that, like, the politics behind this stuff is not something we want to go into in depth, but there's some big things potentially that are problematic with this. And the video I'm doing will probably be a little more sensational than this live stream. This live stream is going to be a little level-headed. But the long and short of it is there's a couple of statements in these amendments to the Lacey Act that can be pretty doom and gloom. You can take them way crazy if you really wanted to. And, knowing the U.S. government, I kind of go... And here's the biggest problem, okay? The biggest problem realistically in this, and I think a few people have all concurred on this part, not necessarily agree on how they interpret the Lacey Act, but the biggest thing that I think most of us in the fish tube world who are all like going, are going to agree on is that the wording in this amendment, and yeah, laws have lots of little changes and all that stuff, but the problem is when a big act goes through like this, they tend to leave stuff super vague on purpose. And that's where this is bad. So I'm going to read you a couple lines. I'm not going to try and read this line by line. I want to be really clear. I do a little bit more of that in the video I'm working on. And that'll be Saturday. And if you don't care, you can ignore it. And that's cool because you were here for the live and you got the easy version of this. But if you want more, Saturday's video is going to be short. It's like, it'll probably only be like 10, 15 minutes. So, the big thing is that the first line in this amendment is changing, and there's like, in subsection A1A, in the first sentence by striking shipment between continental United States and inserting transport between states. So, now what they're trying to do is they're trying to get away from some specific wording that potentially says that things are more restrictive when you're going to say like Alaska or Hawaii, as opposed to within the continental United States. They're making it more broad. And that's one of the first lines that gets a little tricky, right? So basically what this is saying is that the Secretary of Interior can use an emergency designation that would prohibit the importation of any species of wild animal that isn't a dog, a cat, or a common farm animal. So like cattle, sheep, chickens, things like that, right? So basically, if it's a fish, a reptile, a crustacean, an amphibian, birds, all of these things, and mammals too. So some of your weirder pets, like things like ferrets or chinchillas or hedgehogs, right? A lot of these things are all covered under this act. It's very broad. And it includes their offspring or eggs in these species. But basically, there's a super broad language, like in the interests of agriculture, horticulture, forestry, or to wildlife or the wildlife resources of the United States, right? It makes this big, broad painting. And then the more important part is it has this statement later that says that they basically can ban these things after 60 days of public comment if they are deemed injurious. So what the heck does that mean? And you'll forgive me, I have the act over here on my extra monitors. That's why I'll keep looking this way. And I'm trying to read some of it without, missing something too crazy. But the basic part of this is that they can, for whatever reason they want, determine that something is potentially harmful to people, whether it's harmful to our agricultural businesses, to our forest industries. So an example that I'll use is like in Florida, where the manatee's natural habitat is. A bunch of common plecostomuses got released some time ago, and now there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them roaming in these massive packs all over the place, and they're basically competing with the manatees for their food sources. They're destroying parts of the habitat and a lot of things that help the manatee, which is already a not in great shape species of animal, survive. Right, and this is a problem because some dum-dums released them into the wild when they shouldn't have, and they have no predators, nothing. They're just doing fantastic out there, and that's bad for a number of species that are natural to those habitats. So it's an invasive species, right? Well, under this act, potentially, you could say, well, this is damaging an agricultural industry or a some kind of wildlife industry like fishing, because there's all these fish and they're destroying the natural habitats of the fish in this area, and now we can't go for those fish because these fish are now injurious to humans, aka this invasive species is a problem. Now we're going to ban the import of that fish, the Plecostomus, into the United States. And potentially, they could prevent other movement of those fish throughout the United States. It depends on how extreme they want to go. And the big problem is the act is so vague in its wording. And the other thing is there's a basically a whitelist that is referenced, that they'll create a whitelist of things that are okay. And let's say that, like, you know, Shade Aquatic Breeder in chat is saying, well, isn't that the common pleco? Right. But we're talking about the people who are in charge of this. They're not biologists. They're not scientists. They're politicians. So they don't necessarily go, well, that's a bristlenose pleco versus that's a zebra pleco and that's a common pleco. And the common pleco is the one that gets huge and really destroys stuff. And these other ones aren't a problem. They might go, well, they're all plecos, right? Well, they probably all can do this, so we better ban them all. That's a potential. This is like the doomsday scenario, right? This is the doomsday scenario. Broad strokes is the problem. The big problem with this act is the wording. It is so broad that it is difficult to pin down how it could potentially impact our hobby. So that's why you're going to see people that will be super sensational about it. They'd be like, our hobby's coming to an end, man. And there will be other people who are like, dude, it's not going to do anything because there's this whitelist. And they have a specific statement that things that are already coming into the country in a minimum quantity, or a non-minimum quantity, excuse me, are not going to end up being impacted. But the problem is it doesn't define what minimum quantity threshold is, and what's above that. And I think Corey mentioned that in his live stream. I caught a small part of it while I was like trying to rush through traffic home. Basically, like, is a minimum quantity like 100,000 or is it like 2 billion? Because we know 100,000 neon tetras are coming into the country every year, but we don't know that 2 billion of them are. You know? So the question is what is the threshold to where things are just going to be basically grandfathered in and still be kept okay? And there's some great mentions in chat. So like Paul Saltero just mentioned that this is the same agency that was responsible for the kudzu, which is a super invasive, like excessively fast-growing vine that basically destroyed large portions of forestry in the South. Right? So, not necessarily the people that know this from a scientific level as to whether or not they're a problem. And you could have, you know, the really extreme take on this is you could go, well, Canada banned the white cloud mountain minnow because it affects certain native fish and can outcompete them because they breed much faster, that are basically a feeder fish to other fish in this habitat. And because it's messing with one native species, we'll ban it across the whole country because it's too dangerous. Right? And they basically act as a feeder fish if they got released in the wild. You could have, and I think it's parts of Canada. I can't remember the exact details. I'm not in Canada, so I don't know. But you could have someone go, well, man, Canada banned this thing, so maybe we should ban it too. Right? Because we're talking about politicians and policymakers and not necessarily people that are a hobbyist of any form. And this gets even potentially scarier for people who are like reptile fans or birds or things like this, because you look at places like Florida. Florida's kind of like the big problem for a lot of these things, because so many things have been released in the wild and they flourish in those environments where, a lot of the like tropical birds and pet birds are not going to live in Minnesota in the winter, or reptiles are not going to live in Minnesota in the winter, right? It's too cold for them. But they can look at a problem in one spot because of how broad that this amendment is written, and they can do a sweeping change that affects the entirety of a hobby in the whole country. So that's where the real like reasonable freak out is because it's so broad and not well defined. It is hard to tell exactly what's going on. Now the flip to this is that the pet industry has been lobbying against things like this for decades. And you have things like you have states like California that are a little more restrictive, that have basically a blacklist, we'll call it, or an invasive species list, or a not allowed to keep list, whatever the heck you want to call it. I don't know the exact name that they're using down there, but this list of fish, all the stuff you can't keep. Well, now they have to produce a white list. And the real problem that I see is that if they have to invest a lot of time in creating the white list, what prevents them from being lazy about it and just going, if it wasn't bred in the United States, you can't have it. We won't let it be imported. Who cares about these little ornamental fish? They're not food. Who cares? And there's arguments that, well, that's better. It means that people have to breed fish in the United States in order to get them, and that's better for us instead of all these imports. But there's a lot of fish that just, like, you can't easily breed or cannot breed in captivity that really don't... They don't breed in captivity well. Autocinclus are an example. Many of your loaches are an example. It's... While it's possible to do a lot of various fish, you then get into a thing where you're slowly weakening the genetics over time because there's no other genetics to mix up into there. And it can cause issues over time. So that's where there's a lot of stuff. And the biggest problem is this thing is already past the House. And it's headed to the Senate, so it's already like halfway through the process. And the thing is, there's lots of stuff in it that is good, and they've kind of snuck these amendments in there that are a problem. So the real question is, how much are we freaking out, right? Because I think every person has a different viewpoint. Corey, for an example, made this example that maybe they will re-examine the Asian arowana and they'll no longer deem that it's an invasive species, and we might be able to keep Asian arowana in the United States legally again. And I want to paint the opposite picture in that I don't know that they're going to spend the amount of money it takes to really dig in and go, how many of these things are okay and not a problem, without some more detail in the writing. Because it is so vague, it has a huge risk to just be negative. And often, especially nowadays, it is more about stopping things from happening than it is from allowing things to occur. And I'm not talking about, like, I don't want to talk one side or the other. That's not the part I want to talk about. But more just that, as opposed to making things better, it seems like a lot of it is restricting, right? And that's, take that how you will, but it feels like a lot of the changes that we see make it harder and harder to do things, as opposed to, and for some reason, there's lots of good reasons, but you have groups like US ARC, who's going to lobby against it. And if you want some really good details on all the stuff that's happening, like here's usarc.org and their information on the Lacey Act and some updates. Like, that's great. There's lots of discussion in the reptile community. A coworker of mine, he used to be a big python breeder down in Florida, and now he lives up here and he's getting back into pythons again, and he's always showing me pictures of his steaks and talking stuff that he's doing, or like this new steak that he's picking up sometime soon and some projects he's working on, and he babbles genetics at me, and you know, we talked about this for a minute where it's just like this because it's so broad, it has some seriously scary potential implications. That's why I think most people are freaking out. Because you could take this to a scary level, and I've reread this a couple of times, and changing it to transport between the states. So you could, in theory, interpret this broadly as, if I live in Washington State and Kingfishers Catch, Joe Davis wants to buy a fish from Bentley, and Bentley's like, yeah, I actually have a shipping window. I'm going to take a day off work because Joe's my good buddy. I'm going to ship him some of this fish that he's been wanting for a long time. Well, that's transport between the states. I can't transport between the states. That's like the psycho scary level that this very broad language can take us to. And I think that's the bigger problem. The bigger problem is how undefined the language is. Now, I have a video that's going to come out, and you'll probably see a little bit more of my sensational, I don't know, opinion. I have a little bit more editing and stuff to do on it, but that'll be out Saturday. But I have some serious concerns looking at this, and a lot of that is because I keep fish that don't come in huge quantities, rainbow fish, and are capable of living in certain areas. But even though they're a schooling fish, they're a large schooling fish, so they could potentially compete with other fish in those native areas. Potentially, right? This is painted so broadly that that's the scary part. So I could literally, if this act goes into measure, and yeah, they talk about, well, we're going to give 60 days of public comment. But if you look at when the Federal Trade Commission, Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, was doing changes to how internet was classified, whether or not it went under, was it Title II? Sorry, like, everything's blurred so much together and I'm forgetting some things. It basically said, is this a utility or not? If it's a utility, then it goes under certain protections. If it's not, then it doesn't. And they opened it to public comment, and despite thousands and thousands and thousands of people mailing in like, please don't do this, please protect the internet as it is, it's better for people because they can now, we don't have to risk like prices just being jacked up all over the place. And the argument was, well, free and open market, blah blah blah, too bad. Oh, most of the comments we got were just troll comments or people being rude and not real comments. And the thing is, like, the government loves to do that stuff, because if they really want something, or heaven forbid, the lobbyists who pay the most money want something, it often goes through. And that's the sad part about the United States government right now. US ARC is trying to lobby against it, but they have to fight a lot of things. They have to fight a lot of people that have a lot of money. And that's the risk. This excessively broad language combined with interest groups, and the pet trade is an interest group in the grand scheme of things as far as how our government treats things. Our meaning people like me who live in the United States. I know I have people that are Not in the United States, maybe you're not as worried, but you have also people in like Australia where it's a little more restrictive than it is here. Look at how impossible it is to buy a fluval light in Australia, right? It's like $600 down there. That's where some of the problems come in. So, now that I've babbled for 20 minutes about this potential nightmare, let's talk. I mean, Paul Sotero, I think you have a great comment here, is if this bill goes through unchanged, you can kiss businesses like Redfish, Bluefish, Dan's Fish, The Wet Spot, Aquatic Arts goodbye because they deal in less common species. And they're not necessarily brick and mortar stores. Their primary business is shipping across the country. And that's where the broadness of this language is really, really scary to a lot of businesses. I know Dan's Fish and Redfish Bluefish had emails come out, and that was part of what sounded my horn to it. And I read, the first time I read the act, like, I seriously went, are you kidding me? Because you kind of have to read this several times. Because it's so broad, you can interpret it so many different ways. Great. Craig in chat is like, pea puffers are $250 a piece in Australia. Pea puffers are like $14 in Washington or whatever. They're almost nothing. But yeah, and the Lacey Act amendments are, because they're so broad, that's what's really scary about them. Yeah. Another comment, and I think this is kind of I'm on the same page. Alyssa Bentley said, I admit to having freaked out the first day or two that I heard about it, to a point where I thought they'd make me bleach my tanks. I look at it like, I'm only allowed to have whatever I have, and now I can't have anything else. That was my first reaction, is like, oh my god, can I really never get anything else if this goes to pass? Because I'm a rainbow fish nerd. And it's not like these are like, why there's so many of them. It's not like I just go to like Jim down the street and he's breeding these, and I go to Bob up the street and he's got those, and I go to my local distributor and we breed all this stuff in house. Like, no, it's all shipped in. It's all like small hobbyist amounts and all this stuff. And like, you got guys like Marcel, who's doing a presentation to the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society tonight, online, live, about radnocentris, rads. I highly suggest, if you want something that won't freak you out and maybe make you feel a little bit better, watch that after I'm done babbling. In fact, I will put a link in chat for all of you because I think that's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. I have to look it up. This is where, like, I didn't prepare myself for this part. Haha, there it is. There's my link. That's what I'm looking for. It's free on YouTube to everybody. But I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at this scared. Because, you know, like I said, Shade Aquatics made a great point. Part of importing fish, even for those of us who have fish that are actively bred in the United States, is to keep diversifying the genetics. Maybe you have a strain of really good long fin super red bristlenose that's out in Germany, let's say. And you got yours here that originated from someone else somewhere else, and you're like, oh, I can combine those genetics by getting some fish from this person in Germany, and maybe that will give me, you know, a slightly better coloration, or just make the fish even hardier. Not that plecos aren't super hardy, but look at things like your various guppy strains that we get out of like Thailand and stuff. Those just go away, according to what you can read here. I mean, it's woo, it has some serious risk. Oh man, and that's the part that I think actually like freaks a lot of us out when it comes to this stuff. There's a comment at 1816. I need to find it. One second. Do. It's one from Paul. Okay, here's a great one. So, from Joe Davis, I'm concerned that by closing legal avenues for hobbyists, then the illegal activities to bring fish in will proliferate, and lead to worse practices that impact every species involved. So that's from Kingfishers Catch. And yeah, I mean, if you look at in the United States, you have a lot of illegal fish that are brought in. You have some of the things that are not currently allowed because of CITES that command huge money, and that's where you see some less about the passion for the hobby and more about the money, and that causes all sorts of issues. And that's a problem, you know. Gorgachev, my thought is how people ignore how the pet trade can save species. Yes! Okay, so Gorgachev, you actually have something that is directly in the video I have for the Saturday, which is that, and you have the white cloud minnow, a great example, because that's also a fish that is banned in certain parts of Canada. Maybe it's all of Canada, I'm not sure. My Canadian friends help me out here. You probably know the story better than I do. But several rainbow fish species don't exist if it's not for hobbyists. The Centaniensis, the Centani rainbow, it's a beautiful rainbow fish. I have some of them. They don't exist without hobbyists. They're extinct in the wild. Wanamensis, the emerald rainbow, they're extinct in the wild. Tons of African cichlids are extinct in the wild, but exist in hobbyist tanks. That's the only reason they still exist in the world. A lot of our Gadeids and a lot of those cool live bearers that are becoming more and more rare, they flourish in hobbyist tanks. It's potentially really, really scary. Alien World Aquatics, have Petco PetSmart said anything or commented about this? No. And I will preface that you could almost argue this is nearing the, like, conspiracy theory, right? It's not, but Petco and PetSmart doesn't necessarily compete against a lot of the imported fish. They do most of their financials in dry goods, right? Where mom and pop businesses tend to thrive is that combination or that specialization, because they're not the big box stores. They have certain things that they do really, really well, usually because they're passionate about those things. But if they can't carry part of what allows their entirety of their business to survive, and this again is going a little deeper down the rabbit hole of this is the scary part of this, then the big box stores don't have competition anymore. Because the majority of their business is dog and cat related, and this doesn't affect dog and cat related stuff. So all the dog food and cat food and dog treats and cat toys and beds and this and that, and believe me, I know, because I spent too much money on my dogs, they still got that covered. But your mom and pop stores, usually they carry a lot of little stuff because that's what they need to do in order to survive. Or you have specialist stores like our local fish stores. They probably make better money on their dry goods or frozen foods, but having the fish there and having hobbyists like us who are always in there like, hey man, what new fish did you get in? I need something different in my tank. What you got? What you got? You know, we go in there because this is out of our addiction. This is what's our fun. But we're in there looking for something new to put in there. And oh, of course we need food while we're there. Oh, I'm going to do a new tank. I need another filter. I need another heater. I need whatever that piece of equipment might be that add into those every time. We're just like, well, I haven't been to the fish store in 2 weeks. Well, maybe I should go down, see what's new, see how my friend at the fish store is. And then you walk out and you spent like, $80 or whatever it is. They rely so heavily on that. Whereas the big box stores, your average Joe goes in there because they're like, running out of cat food, or I need kitty litter, or I ran out of treats for my dog. I need to go get some doggy biscuits for old Fido. And while I'm there, I suppose I should get another bag of food. I am getting kind of low. oh, his dog bed's getting a little beat up. Maybe I should get him a new dog bed or a blanket or a toy, or I tore that rope apart, but he loves that dang rope. I better get a new rope. Whatever. Think about those little add-ons. Big box stores have all that stuff covered, and they have it in the ridiculous, right? They have it in the ridiculous amount where, like, mom and pop stores don't necessarily have the business like that. Some do, but not all of them. A lot of the mom and pop stores specialize, especially in our hobby, but you'll get a lot of, like, more reptile-centric people or more bird-centric places. We used to have in the Seattle area this wonderful bird store called Wings of the World. And I think the family still does a lot of breeding of birds and stuff like that, but I don't think they have a storefront anymore. And I remember going there all the time as a kid, and it was literally just birds. All birds, nothing else. Nothing else. But potentially, with these revisions to the Lacey Act, they could just not exist. It's crazy. It's crazy. The potential, because of how broad it's written. And son of a quack, that impression you did is the worst case of MTS I've seen. I feel like I know hobbyists that, other than like being a little too animated in my impression, are like that. Denikin Aquatics. They have their whole house is fish tanks, man. They have so much cool stuff in their house. Like, I would go in there like a fish store because there's so much stuff. I've seen tours and I'm like, that is impressive. Or like Lucas's place, right? And Lucas, he wants to just go bigger. I love that madman. I love him to death. Because he's just like, this is not enough. I need bigger. Yes, you are the right kind of special person that I love in this hobby. But potentially, people like that, even breeders, could be impacted by this. Huge distributors like Seagrass Farms, they're out there trying to fight against it because they're impacted by this. Even the smaller distributors that are out there are going to be affected by this in one way, shape, or form. That's where this is really interesting. I will say, like, you could just fill our tanks with duckweed. Alien World Aquatics. Oh, man. Paul, I haven't got an update. I need to message Lucas to see if he finally got a buyer lined up all the way. I know he had several people that were interested last time I talked to him, and prospects looked really good, but I don't know if he officially, like, signed, sealed, delivered, has it set going. So I need to check in just because, like, I'm rooting for the guy, right? I sincerely want him to, like, find a buyer and live his dream because I'm totally down with that crazy man. I love what he's trying to do. He's like, I'm not big enough. I need to go even bigger. And I love the fact that he's chasing that dream, dude. It's so great. But yeah, it's... man, there's some serious risk in this thing. A new name, Duckweed Aquatics. Kingfishers catch, Bentley. Farm animals. They're talking about potential impact of animals on native habitat, yet farm animals aren't penalized. I get it. We gotta eat, but that's double standard. Yeah, well, and part of it is because farm animals are considered a positive impact to agriculture and all that kind of stuff, even though technically they're a negative impact to forestry and some of those other things. But because it's a massive business in the United States, just think about, like, just the farmers, like the massive farming lobbies that are out there to protect farmers. There's no way they would do bigger restrictions on that because it's such a huge industry for a large portion of the United States. But, like, fish tank nerds like us, like, think about just how Hawaii, right, has locked down a lot of their wild collection of things like yellow tangs because they're trying to make it more sustainable, but they can just lock it down in an even harder way at the federal level. So that's the risk. Chris Robertson, Billy Pasco, he got a buyer that is waiting for their house to sell. Dude, that's fantastic. I gotta reach out. I gotta get a direct from Lucas, because I'm hoping maybe he has a timeline and stuff. That's great. That's great news. Like, I'm super stoked for him. I gotta give him a congrats, because I've been like this deep at work. We've had some fun. This is what I'm referring to as my hell week. I've been very, very busy putting in extra hours since last week, so it was kind of a miracle. I was actually worried I wouldn't be able to stream tonight. And I'm down to a wire of, like, I might be able to leave, and then I will have to work after stream, or I won't be able to leave, and I have to put up a, sorry guys, no stream notification. Luckily, made it out. Does this matter for aquatic plants at all, or is this a stupid question? So right now, it only addresses animals. But you have to think, like, how many people are going to keep doing aquatic plants if they can't have fish in their tanks? Like, that's the extreme, right? But right now, it's only live animals. Okay. Leo, really early in chat, you had a question about your betta. Let me see if I can still see it, or if I've lost it. Oh, can I add anything at all to my betta tank, bottom dweller wise, or something small, or not worth the risk? I mean, yes, you can. The big thing is, like, you have such a small tank in its gallonage, right, with only 5 gallons. You don't have a lot of room. You would have to do something that's, like, pretty minimal waste, and hope that also your betta is not, like, a jerk. and doesn't turn into a jerk when something gets added. You could do some of the smaller quarries like Pygmaea or Histatus, something like that. But, yeah, I mean, technically there's room. It's just you now have to do a little bit more maintenance and be a little more on top of your cleaning your filter and water changes. Or you just let the betta live on his own and have just a dedicated betta tank. Personally, at 5 gallons, I would do a dedicated betta tank. When you start getting to like 10, 15 gallons, that's when I start looking at having a few extra fish. I would just, like, plant it and let your betta have his own, like, little bachelor pad in there, you know? That's what I would do personally, but yeah, you technically have room to put some extra fish if you really want to. Let's see here. Yeah, pretty much every plant at the local nursery could be considered invasive. Yeah, that's true. And yes, the golden mare, even though you're late, don't worry. Better late than never is an old adage. But yeah, no, it affects basically everything in the pet trade, except for dogs, cats, and common farm animals. So, reptiles, mammals, birds, fish, all of it. All of it. Your ferrets, your chinchillas, your rats, your mice, your hedgehogs, your guinea pigs, your hamsters, fish, your frogs, your lizards, your snakes, your axolotls, they're not a fish. Seriously, it affects a lot of stuff, and the language is so broad. That's the problem. All right, New Mexico Aquatics. Hello, Bobby. How you doing, buddy? My Fluval 3.0 is just over 3 years old. All the blue, cold white, pure white LEDs stopped working. Only pink and warm white work. How will this affect plant growth? It, other than losing like power, so par, right, the way we would normally measure it as a par meter, but losing some of the power and how deep it can penetrate the tank, really not a lot, because warm white and red is actually really good for plant growth. Now, the appearance of how things happen is it's going to look a little different, right? I would check to see if you're still in your warranty range, because can you get the, oh no, it's the, sorry, I'm thinking of the Tidal that allows you to go up to 5 years. It's only 3 years on the 3.0. It's better than most LEDs, though. And I don't think I have anything burnt out on any of mine, and I've got several of mine that are at that age or older. So I guess I'm lucky, or maybe it's just unfortunate that yours burned out. But yeah, it shouldn't negatively impact you, depending on what you're planting. Now, if you're doing some really, really intense demand plants, yeah, those are going to be affected because you don't have as powerful or as much light coming out, and that has some risk. But, you know, if you're putting this thing on, say, like a 40 breeder, and you just pump the warm white, like, way up to help compensate because you have less overall lights, should still function for a good bit. Ian Firewater, how about a 2.5 gallon? Oh no. I have a really old one with a metal frame and slate bottom. Nice. Sealing it up for something, just not certain what. I mean, there's several things you can do in that. The question is just how much maintenance do you want to do that tank? Because you have such a small gallonage of water, smaller changes have larger impacts. So having a bigger bio load, bigger, escalates the smaller your overall water size is. So the less gallons you have, the faster that high bio load threshold hits on a tank, because there's less water to dilute it down. And it means that the filtration has to account for more and more and more. More sensitive fish will be affected faster. You can get spikes easier. You can get crashes easier because there's less water, so it's not as easy to stay stable. That's some of the risks. You can still keep something in there, but I would say, like, at a 2.5 gallon, keep something very small. You can keep, like, a small colony of shrimp. That colony will probably get out of hand. You'll need to move shrimp, but try to find small things. Like, in general, I don't like putting bettas in stuff that small because I like giving them more space, but you could, in theory, put a betta in something that small. Lots of people have put bettas in smaller, and I feel horrible, but you can do that. You can. They live in small stuff in the wild, especially if you get some of the smaller species of bettas, like placots and some of those guys that stay a bit smaller. But yeah, just know it's a much smaller water volume, so it's easier to have crashes and spikes and all that kind of stuff. Just be prepared for it. Bob Purcell. Dave Kaufman had an interesting take on invasive versus non-native. Invasive does harm, but not every non-native species does harm. I'd be interested to hear that. I'd have to look it up. How do I breed a vampire shrimp with a cherry shrimp? You don't. They're two completely different species. They don't do that. Man. Oh, Chris Robertson has actually a great idea for that 2.5 gallon. You can do micro crabs. That's kind of cool and a little oddball-y and fun. Or like even some of the like African frogs, potentially. I mean, probably couldn't do very many, but it's a little different. Let's see, have a little fun with that little tank. Bob Purcell, my Melanotaenia species Kalitawa, one of the most desirable rainbows out there, arrived from Dan's Fish today. Can't wait for them to grow, color up. How long do rainbows typically live? So, I'm not sure about the Kalitawa, because they're one of the dwarf species, and some of the dwarf species are long-lived, where they live, 7 to 8 years, sometimes upwards of 12. The big rainbows can live a long time, like upwards of 15 years. But very frequently, the most common is somewhere in that 7 to 8 year range. Some of the dwarf species only live like 3 to 5 years. So I'm not sure about the Kalitawa on their lifespan. They're kind of just so new to the hobby that I have no clue what they're like in captivity. I would gander, though, that, you could probably assume at least 5 years. Like my Melandas that were in here, which are kind of similar size fish, live 5 years. My running rivers I've had for about 4.5 years now, and they're going strong, and they're a similar size. So there's a lot of options. Golden Bear. In the 60s, you could walk into a Florida importer and see hundreds of bettas in little glass containers. It was amazing and well taken care of as they were shipping out to stores. That's pretty cool. You can see that in some places now, but it's a lot tougher to find it in that regard, is in the sense of being able to walk into them anymore. Jacob Hill, I'm moving this summer across country, and I have a 10-gallon with a pretty good amount of plants, 10 shrimp, and 10 white cloud minnows. How would you move it, and is there a way I can do it without destroying it? This is tough. So, usually what I would do is I would move all of my fish and plants to a bucket. and get something like the USB-powered air pump that allows me to keep air running while them moving. But because you're moving across country, this is a little tougher. Because you have to keep them heated. You probably have to, depending on how fast you're doing that drive, you might have to do some water changes along the way. Corey and gang, when they brought back some stuff, they did a video about it. I'm trying to remember what it was like. They went to one of the aqua shallows or something like that. They brought back some plecos. And basically what they did is they took a tote, right, that they could move up to the room so it wasn't a ton of gallonage, and do water changes. They just kept a bottle of Prime with them, basically, and an air stone. And you can do like one of like little 25-watt heaters, those small, like, safe heaters, and to keep some temperature up if you need the temperature. But in the case of like shrimp and white clouds, they don't care about temperature. So I would literally just take a bucket, put an air stone in it, and just make sure that they stay at room temperature, and slowly let them in their tank as they are come down to that temperature. And assuming that your trip's only a few days, you probably don't even need to feed them. Right? I would fast them the day before you're going to leave. That way they get whatever's in their system kind of out. About a day into your drive, if you're in a good place where you can do a small water change in that bucket, do a little water change. You could even take like, if you have a sponge filter in that tank, take your sponge filter, put it in the bucket. Like, clean it out real nice so that it's not full of gunk. But make sure that it keeps its bacteria. Put it in the bucket, run a little USB air power stone to your car, especially if you have a USB in your car. Easy peasy. Or get one of the battery-powered ones, the Marinas. That's another great one. Oh, yeah, Fishing Mailman, that was Cataclysm. Yeah, you're right. Let me see. I can give you a link to the Marina one. I can't remember if they're keeping it. Or there's that new air pump that has a battery backup built into it, so you can literally charge it while you're in a hotel, if you're going to stop in a hotel or wherever you can get power, and then have it run for a while in your car and then recharge it, all kind of stuff. Basically, keep oxygen going. That's the big thing. And then for your tank, drain it down as much as possible. Wrap it in saran wrap. Right? So that's going to hold the moisture in. If you have a bunch of hardscape, you're probably going to have to disassemble it somehow and kind of reassemble it when you get back. But what I would do is, whenever you make a pit stop to use the bathroom or whatever, have a little spray bottle of just some clean water, dechlorinated, preferable, but not necessarily required, and just give it a spray. Like, just undo some of the saran wrap, give it a good spray down, lock it back down, and keep it sealed so it stays humid inside that tank. That's going to be your best bet. Most of the plants will do okay if you do it like that for a few days. It'd be like if you did it for a week where you run into some issues. The hard part is just keeping hardscape from doing any nonsensical stuff, and just drive patient, drive relaxed, easy peasy. Mike Stambaugh. See who is speaking on YouTube for the Greater Sacramento Group? Marcel. Marcel is speaking to the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society tonight on YouTube. Right there. But yeah, Marcel's awesome. I'm glad he's getting some rounds. Kingfisher's Catch. The Vampire Cardinal Tetra Hybrid is the Pulserax Weitzmani. Alright, I gotta look at this thing. I gotta look at it. We got here. I probably butchered the name there. What the? Black Morpho Tetra, huh? Dude, that does look crazy. Hold on. Let me try and get you guys an image so you can see this, because it's pretty wild. Let's get one that isn't quite as... This is from Aquarium Glacier. That's a good one. That's a good one. Where is this trying to... Save this. I want you guys to see this because it's pretty wild. Yeah, it got corrected. Got corrected. I need that. We're gonna edit this thing. Doing this on the fly. Doing it terrible. Oh, it's gonna be tiny. Here we go. Womp. Show this thing. Bonk. Check that crazy thing out. That's a pretty wicked looking fish. It almost looks like it's like part pseudomagil with a finnage. Jacob, yeah, and you could use some of those ammonia absorbing sponges too. Totally works. Totally works. The fishy mailman, one of my talents of memorization, paid off in the army and as a mailman. Cobalt chargeable air pump works great. So there you go, Farron. Thanks for the heads up on that. So there's lots of options. To me, I use those little USB ones. I think they're perfect for a bucket. Plus, I am fortunate in that my current vehicle has like literally just USB ports in the car. So I literally just plug it in and it's right there. It's easy peasy. Chance Larson, it looks like you definitely feed that thing other fish. Yeah, it's pretty wild looking. It looks angry. It certainly looks angry and mean. Oh, man. Alright, I want to make sure I didn't miss something else neat and important. Let's see here. Son of a Quack recently moved a new sick Cory I got into a spare tank I had. Think he had parasites, ended up getting ick, but the spots disappeared. Is everything infected? I would just monitor. Just monitor, and if you start seeing any signs, or you could proactively medicate with an antiparasitic just to be safe. But usually what I do is monitor, because often if it's a parasite issue, they typically stay in the host until the host dies, and then they move on and infect other fish. Not always, but usually. So monitor, but if you want to be super safe about it, you could just kind of preemptively lightly medicate just to play it safe. But the QT tank is what matters, especially for the one that is obviously having issues. If you got ick after being moved, then you're probably safe on the ick side as well. Just as a heads up. Okay, we're getting close. The Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's meeting is going to start very, very soon. Or actually, is kind of half live. They start in like 2 minutes. No offense to Dr. Black, buddy, but it's a presentation on Radnocentris. It's on Rads. I gotta give it some love. I'm sorry, bud. But if you would prefer, instead of listening to the wonderful Marcel W., aka Roseline17 and Aquabid, I do believe Dr. Black's got a stream. I'll link that bad boy too. 1 minute. There it is. Have a beverage with the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Black. That's right there. I'll be going soon. Michael, Bentley, do you know anything about fire green tetras? Do you mean green fire tetras, or I'm making sure it's not a different tetra I know? It takes on for them to color up like the internet. Mine are pretty pale after a month or so. On the electric are super. So keep in mind, a lot of photos on the internet are going to be color enhanced. They're edited on purpose to make colors pop. But they do have a relatively good green coloration when they're happy. Plants helps. A good diet helps. You just want to make sure they're comfortable. I've actually written an article on the Green Fire Tetra for the Aquarium Co-op back at a short period of time when I was writing some stuff for their newsletters. I bet you didn't know I did that for a little while, huh? I did it kind of as an independent contractor thing. I wrote some very short articles for them for a little bit. It was like some species spotlights and stuff, but yeah. Don Gallagher, does your first tier membership include Discord? The Discord's at Pseudomagil and higher. It was just my way to kind of differentiate, because there's kind of like the I want to help versus the like I'm a crazy person. I don't know. I'm thinking about changing all my membership just like a single level to make it simple for people, but if you dig hard enough, you might still find a invite that in the members only post that will actually let you get in there, despite being an auto-singless. Just a little tip. You just dig through members only stuff, you might find one. And yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in this bill. Please, please, please. I would say start here. This is the last kind of push I will for the bill before I sign up for the knife. But start at usarc.org. They just have some really good information. And in general, they're a pretty good organization that'll give you some updates about what's going on in this act. If you're outside the United States, it's still a good read to understand what potentially might come your way in your country if things go through in the United States. So thank you for the chat. If you guys are watching the replay crew, I'd love to see your comments down below about what your opinions are with the Lacey Act amendments and all that kind of stuff that's in the American Competes Act. Yada, yada, yada. All those good things. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I know this has been a little spiraling into the weird, but, as always, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome. And I really hope they don't just, ban all my fish, because I'm going to be really sad if they do. Y'all have a good night. We'll see you next week.